So we all know what a bloom is, but what the heck is a foam slurry? By definition, a foam is a light frothy mass of fine or small bubbles that form in or on the surface of a liquid. And a slurry is a watery mixture of insoluble matter. In coffee brewing, a foam is formed when we first apply hot water to ground coffee. In English, we call this a bloom, though in this initial state, the coffee slurry should be referred to as a foam or foam slurry. So why should we care? Well, if you ever wondered why it's not recommended to pour all your water in at once, or better yet, why some people recommend pouring 2 times versus 3 times the dry mass of ground coffee for their initial bloom, taking a closer look at the bloom will give us some interesting clues. So during the blooming process, you can see the coffee instantly transform into a foam and float to the top. And considering that this is a conical shaped dripper, there's a larger volume of coffee floating above the fluid line compared to below. Note that throughout this entire process, fluid is continually draining and only percolating through a small percentage of the coffee slurry below. So if we had poured additional water in this first pour, we'd only be adding excess water below the foam. And again, that excess water will only be percolating through a small percentage of the total slurry below. So here's a look at another foam being formed. At this volatile stage, the outgassing is so aggressive that the water from the kettle pour isn't able to break the foam apart. This is a case with manual agitation as well, which is why at this specific stage of the bloom, using manual agitation with a stick or a spoon solely to break up the foam isn't an efficient use of energy. What I would recommend is focusing on the lower part of the slurry to dislodge any dry pockets that your kettle pour would have left behind. This will typically increase the flow rate, as knocking out any hydrophobic particles will help optimize the conductivity through the filter paper. So why is it usually recommended to wait during a bloom? Well, this goes back to deflection. So during this outgassing of CO2, water is actually being deflected from efficiently saturating the coffee cellulose in exchange for flavor compounds. This is why it's primarily recommended to wait after the first pour. After the foaming and degassing is subsided, there's a lot less deflection and a kettle pour can break the foam apart, allowing particles to reincorporate back into the total slurry. And after all this incorporation, additional fluid can now percolate through a larger volume of the total slurry. So, to sum it up, foams float. During the first pulse or bloom phase, a majority of the coffee is floating above the surface of the fluid. This means that adding additional fluid only fills up below the foam and only percolates to a small percentage of the slurry below. Foams are strong. As dry coffee transforms into a foam, it's incredibly tenacious and difficult to break apart. So rather than using manual agitation to break the foam apart, you should probably spend your time inspecting the lower part of the slurry for any dry patches, unless you're trying to saturate and reincorporate dry patches that you see on top of the slurry. Be patient. You'll often hear that it's best practice to wait around 30 to 45 seconds after the first pour. A basic rule of thumb for how much you should wait after the first pour is until all of the movement has subsided. That means that most of the bubbling, foaming, or draining has either slowed or stopped. But at the end of the day, we're all brewing with different roast profiles, tools, and techniques, that there are really no hard rules. This is because the volatility or the CO2 content of the coffee is greatly dependent on the roast profile, the temperature of the water used, the grind profile, and how long the coffee has rested since roast date. So if you look outside your territorial region, you'll notice that there's a huge variety of recommendations on how much to bloom and how long to wait. And these reasons aren't right or wrong. They're specifically based on the culture and the kinds of roast profiles that are used for brewing. And it also includes the different kinds of techniques and the different kind of history and lineage that brewing has within their specific region. So personally, when I brew, I'm always visualizing the foam and how much water there is below the foam line. Other people believe that there's a lot of flavor development going on during the bloom, so they don't want to disturb it and they actually want to incubate it or develop it further. So the best thing to do is to pay attention to what's happening. How fast is the water draining versus how much you've applied, and how much foam and volatility there is when you first bloom. But above all, see what works for you inside your environment with the tools that you use and the coffee that you like brewing. In the comments below, let us know what your blooming technique is. How much water do you use to how much dry coffee? How long do you wait? what results do you have? Also, if you have an interesting blooming technique, let us know that as well. Always looking for some funky recipes to try out. Note, this is specifically a demonstration of the foam created in the slurry. And to achieve this cutaway view, a front portion of the filter paper also had to be removed. Since a dripper has no filter paper on the front, the cutaway footage is not intended to be a one-to-one representation of all the dynamics in the slurry. Though along with any shortcomings this method of observation may have, understanding brewing techniques from every perspective possible is still important and worth exploring. So, if you like this video, give a thumbs up and subscribe to Brew, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.